Maria had never imagined she'd be running a ranch by herself. 8 years ago, when her husband died in that terrible car accident, she thought her world was over. She had a 12-year-old son named Alex to raise, bills piling up, and 15 acres of land that seemed too big for just the two of them. But somehow they made it work. Maria learned everything about farming the hard way, through YouTube videos, library books, and plenty of mistakes. Alex grew up fast, helping his mom every day after school. By the time he turned 20, he wasn't just helping anymore. He was running his own little piece of the ranch. Alex had claimed a quarter-acre section right near the front of their property. It wasn't much, but to him it was everything. He grew the most beautiful heirloom tomatoes you'd ever seen, deep red ones that tasted like summer itself. His bell peppers were so perfect they looked like they belonged in a magazine. And his herbs? Local restaurants actually called to ask if he had any extra basil or oregano. Every Saturday morning, Alex would load up his old pickup truck with wooden crates full of vegetables. He'd drive to the farmer's market in town and set up his little stand. The money he made wasn't huge, but it was his. Every dollar went straight into his college savings account. He dreamed of studying agriculture at the state university. Maybe. Becoming the kind of farmer who could teach other people how to grow their own food. Life was good. Hard, but good. Maria worked her day job at the local bank, and Alex handled most of the farming. They had their routine, their dreams, and their little piece of heaven. Then the developers came. It started small. A few surveyors walking around, the empty fields next to their ranch, some construction trucks rumbling past their house. Maria didn't think much of it at first. Rural areas were always changing, and she figured maybe someone was building a barn or fixing a road. But then the bulldozers arrived, and the cement trucks, and suddenly, where there used to be open fields and old oak trees, there were streets being paved and foundations being poured. Meadowbrook Hills, they called it. The fanciest neighborhood anyone in their small town had ever seen. Houses that cost more than most people made in 10 years. Perfect lawns that looked like golf courses. Streets so clean you could eat off them. The whole development went up in less than 2 years. Maria watched from her kitchen window as mansion after mansion appeared, each one bigger and more expensive than the last. The houses were beautiful, she had to admit, but they felt cold somehow, like they were built for magazine photos instead of real families. Alex didn't like the new neighborhood from the start. "Look at those lawns, Mom," he'd say, pointing at the yards that were so green they almost looked fake. "Not a single weed anywhere. You know how much chemicals they must use to keep grass looking like that?" Maria tried to stay positive. New. Neighbors meant new customers, right? Maybe some of those fancy families would want to buy fresh vegetables instead of the plastic-wrapped stuff from the grocery store. She was wrong. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning. Maria was getting ready for work when she heard someone yelling outside. She looked out her bedroom window and saw a woman standing at the edge of their property, pointing at Alex's garden and talking loudly into her phone. The woman was tall and thin, with blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She wore white pants that probably cost more than Maria's monthly grocery budget, and she was clearly angry about something. Maria couldn't hear exactly what the woman was saying, but she caught a few words. Unsightly, property values, and something needs to be done about this. When Alex came in from feeding the chickens, Maria asked him if he knew anything about the angry woman. "Oh, that's the new neighbor," Alex said, washing his hands at the kitchen sink. "She moved into that big corner house last month. The one with the circular driveway and the fountain in the front yard. What's her problem?" Alex shrugged. "Beats me. But she's been walking along our fence line every morning for the past week taking pictures of everything." Maria felt a little knot form in her stomach. She'd lived in small towns her whole life, and she knew that look. It was the look of someone who thought they were better than everyone else, someone who wanted things done their way or no way at all. Over the next few weeks, the situation got worse. The woman, Maria learned her name was Linda Morrison, started showing up at town meetings. She'd stand up during the public comment section and complain about the agricultural eyesore next to their beautiful new neighborhood. "Property values are everything in real estate," Linda would say. her voice carrying across the small meeting room. And having a working farm right next to our development is dragging down everyone's investment. What made it even more frustrating was that Linda acted like she was speaking for all her neighbors. But Maria had met some of the other people from Meadowbrook Hills, and they seemed nice enough. Mrs. Chen from the house with the red shutters had even stopped by to buy tomatoes for her grandson, and the young couple with the golden retriever always waved when they walked past the ranch. But Linda was loud, and Linda was persistent, and Linda apparently had a lot of time on her hands. The really weird part was that Maria's ranch wasn't even part of the homeowners association. Her land had been in her husband's family for 3 generations. It was completely separate from the new development, with its own driveway, its own mailbox, and its own property lines that were clearly marked with survey stakes and fence posts. But that didn't stop Linda from acting like she had some kind of authority over what Maria and Alex could do on their own land. The complaints started small. Linda called the county office to ask about zoning regulations. She filed a report about unusual smells coming from the ranch, even though the only smells were fresh vegetables and maybe the occasional whiff of chicken coop. She even tried to claim that Alex's Saturday morning trips to the farmer's market created too much traffic on their quiet street. None of the complaints went anywhere because Maria and Alex weren't doing anything wrong. But dealing with Linda's constant phone calls and visits from county inspectors was exhausting and stressful. Alex tried to ignore it at first. He was 20 years old and had better things to do than worry about some cranky neighbor. But as Linda's campaign against their ranch continued, he started to take it personally. "This is my life's work, Mom," he said one evening as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset. "Those tomatoes aren't just plants to me. They're my future. They're how I'm going to pay for college and maybe buy my own farm someday." Maria could hear the frustration in her son's voice, and it broke her heart. Alex had worked so hard to build his little vegetable business. He'd spent years learning about soil composition and pest control and harvest timing. He got up at dawn to water his plants and stayed up late planning what to plant next season. And now some entitled newcomer was trying to ruin it all because she didn't like the way their property looked from her kitchen window. But Maria had no idea how far Linda Morrison was willing to go to get rid of her problem neighbors. She had no idea that Linda's complaints were about to turn into something much more serious. And she definitely had no idea that Linda's spoiled son was about to become part of the story in the worst possible way. All Maria knew was that she and Alex had worked too hard to let anyone push them off their own land. Whatever Linda Morrison had planned, they were going to fight back. Things got really weird after Linda Morrison started her campaign against the ranch. What began as angry phone calls to the county office quickly turned into something much more serious and much more personal. Maria first noticed the escalation when she came home from work one Thursday evening to find Alex sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of official-looking papers spread out in front of him. His face was pale and he looked like someone had just told him his dog died. "What's all this?" Maria asked, setting down her purse and moving closer to see what had Alex so upset. "County inspector came by today," Alex said, his voice flat. "Linda filed 3 more complaints. She's claiming our chickens are too loud, our compost pile is a health hazard, and that my vegetable stand at the farmer's market doesn't have the right permits." Maria felt her stomach drop. She picked up the papers and started reading. The language was all official and bureaucratic, but the message was clear. Someone was trying very hard to find reasons to shut them down. "Are any of these complaints valid?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Not a single one," Alex replied, running his hands through his hair. "Our chickens are quieter than most people's dogs. The compost pile is built exactly according to agricultural guidelines, and I've had a permit for my farmer's market stand for 3 years running." But even though the complaints were baseless, dealing with them took time and energy that Maria and Alex didn't have to spare. Each inspection meant taking time off work or away from the farm. Each form they had to fill out was another headache they didn't need, and Linda wasn't done yet. The very next week, she somehow convinced 2 other homeowners from Meadowbrook Hills to sign a petition demanding that the county force Maria to relocate her agricultural operation to a more appropriate location. The petition claimed that the ranch was incompatible with residential development and posed environmental and safety risks to nearby families. Maria was furious when she read the petition. Environmental risks? Her organic farming practices were probably better for the environment than those perfect chemical-soaked lawns in Meadowbrook Hills. Safety risks? The biggest danger on her property was maybe stepping in a chicken dropping, but what really bothered her was that Linda was dragging other people into this mess. Maria had always gotten along fine with her neighbors. She'd lived in this community for over a decade, and nobody had ever complained about her farm before the fancy new development showed up. The situation took an even stranger turn when Linda started showing up at Alex's farmer's market stand. It was a Saturday morning in late June, and Alex was having one of his best sales days ever. His tomatoes were just hitting peak season, and people were lined up 3 deep to buy his produce. He was feeling pretty good about life when he looked up and saw Linda Morrison standing at the edge of his booth, just watching. She wasn't buying anything. She wasn't talking to anyone. She was just standing there with her arms crossed, staring at Alex like he was some kind of criminal. "Can I help you with something?" Alex asked, trying to be polite even though Linda had been making his life miserable. "For months, I'm just observing," Linda replied in a voice that could freeze water. "Making sure everything here is legitimate." Alex had no idea what that was supposed to mean, but he didn't have time to figure it out. He had customers to serve and vegetables to sell. So he ignored Linda and went back to work. But Linda didn't leave. She stayed there for almost 2 hours, taking pictures of Alex's stand with her phone and writing notes in a little notebook. She even walked around to the back of his truck to take pictures of his license plate and the wooden crates he used to transport his vegetables. Other vendors at the farmer's market started to notice. Mrs. Patterson, who sold homemade jam at the booth next to Alex's, came over after Linda finally left. "What was that woman's problem?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "She was giving me the creeps just standing there staring at you like that." Alex explained the situation with Linda and the complaints and the petition. Mrs. Patterson just shook her head. "Some people have too much time and too much money," she said. "They move to the country because they want the peaceful rural lifestyle, and then they spend all their energy trying to get rid of the things that make it rural in the first place." But Linda's strange behavior at the farmer's market was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, she started showing up at the ranch itself. At first, it was just drive-bys. Maria would be working in the garden, or Alex would be checking on the chickens, and they'd see Linda's white SUV creeping slowly past their property. She'd have her phone out, taking pictures through the passenger window, trying to document every detail of their operation. Then she started getting out of her car. The first time it happened, Maria was watering her flower beds when she noticed Linda walking along the edge of their property line. Linda was on the public road, so technically she wasn't trespassing, but she was definitely taking pictures of everything she could see. Maria tried to ignore it, but after 20 minutes of watching Linda document every square inch of their property, she finally walked over to the fence. "Is there something I can help you with?" Maria asked, keeping her voice as friendly as possible. Linda looked up from her phone with an expression of pure disgust. "I'm documenting the deteriorating conditions of this property for my report to the county health department." "What deteriorating conditions?" Maria asked, genuinely confused. Their property wasn't perfect, but it was well maintained and clean. Linda gestured vaguely at Alex's vegetable garden. "Uncontrolled plant growth, potential pest harboring, improper water drainage, the list goes on." Maria looked at what Linda was pointing at. Alex's tomato plants were tall and healthy, supported by neat wooden stakes. The rows were straight and weed-free. The irrigation system was professional-grade equipment that Alex had saved up for months to buy. "Those are tomato plants," Maria said slowly, wondering if Linda had ever seen a vegetable garden before in her life. "I know what they are," Linda snapped. "And I know they don't belong in a residential area." "This isn't a residential area," Maria replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "This is agricultural land. It's been agricultural land for 30 years. But Linda was already walking back to her car, muttering something about property values and quality of life issues. The confrontations became more frequent after that. Linda would show up at least twice a week, always with her phone and her notebook, always taking pictures and making notes. She'd examine their fence lines, photograph their compost pile, and even try to get close-up shots of their chickens. Alex started to feel like he was living in some kind of weird surveillance state. Every time he went outside to work on his garden, he had to wonder if Linda was watching him from somewhere, waiting to find something she could complain about. The stress was getting to both of them. Maria started having trouble sleeping, and Alex began to lose his enthusiasm for farming. The work that used to bring him joy now felt like a constant battle to prove that what he was doing was legitimate and legal. But the worst part was still to come. Because Linda Morrison wasn't just interested in getting Maria and Alex to change their farming practices. She had bigger plans, and those plans involved her own son Tyler. Tyler Morrison was everything Alex wasn't. Where Alex was hardworking and humble, Tyler was lazy and entitled. Where Alex had earned every dollar through sweat and long hours, Tyler expected everything to be handed to him. And where Alex genuinely loved farming and growing things, Tyler just saw an opportunity to make easy money. Linda had been bragging to her HOA friends about Tyler's entrepreneurial spirit and his plans to start his own agricultural business. She'd been telling everyone how Tyler was going to show these local farmers how to really run a successful operation. But Tyler had never grown so much as a houseplant in his entire life, and that's when Linda's harassment campaign took a turn that nobody could have predicted. Maria had been looking forward to this Tuesday all week. She'd managed to arrange a half-day off from the bank, and she planned to surprise Alex with his favorite lunch from the deli in town. It was a small thing, but after all the stress with Linda and her complaints, Maria wanted to do something nice for her son. Alex had been working extra hard lately, trying to prove that their farm operation was professional and legitimate. He'd been getting up even earlier than usual, spending hours making sure every plant was perfectly maintained, every tool was in its proper place, and every inch of his garden looked like something from a farming magazine. The harassment from Linda was taking its toll on him. Maria could see it in the way his shoulders slumped when he thought nobody was watching, in the way he'd go quiet during dinner, and in the dark circles under his eyes from staying up late worrying about what new complaint might be coming next. So, when Maria left work at noon and stopped by Giuseppe's Deli to pick up Alex's favorite turkey sandwich and homemade potato salad, she was feeling pretty good about surprising him. Maybe they could sit on the porch together and talk about something other than county inspectors and HOA complaints for once. But as Maria turned into their long gravel driveway, her good mood evaporated instantly. There was a white SUV parked near Alex's vegetable garden. Not on the road this time, not at the property line, but actually on their land, right next to the fence that surrounded Alex's quarter-acre plot. Maria's heart started pounding. She knew that SUV. She'd seen it creeping past their house dozens of times over the past few months. It belonged to Linda Morrison. Maria parked her car quietly near the house and got out slowly, trying to figure out what was happening. She could see two people moving around in Alex's garden, but the tall tomato plants blocked her view of exactly what they were doing. She walked carefully toward the garden, staying close to the tool shed so she wouldn't be seen right away. As she got closer, she could hear voices. Linda's sharp, commanding tone was unmistakable. "No, Tyler, not those ones. Those tomatoes aren't ripe yet. We want the red ones, the ones that look perfect for selling." Maria felt her blood pressure spike. Selling? What was Linda talking about? She crept closer, using the tool shed as cover, and finally got a clear view of what was happening in Alex's garden. What she saw made her so angry she could barely think straight. Linda Morrison was systematically harvesting Alex's vegetables. She had a large wicker basket in her hands, and it was already half full of Alex's prized tomatoes. The beautiful, deep, red heirloom tomatoes that Alex had been nurturing for months, the ones he'd been planning to take to the farmer's market this weekend. But Linda wasn't alone. Her son Tyler was with her, and he had his own basket. They were working their way methodically through Alex's garden like they owned the place, picking the best vegetables and loading them into their containers. Maria pulled out her phone and started recording. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, but she knew nobody would believe her if she didn't have proof. "Make sure you get the good bell peppers too. Linda was saying to Tyler. The red and yellow ones sell for more than the green ones. And grab all those herbs. Fresh basil goes for $5 a bunch at the farmer's market. Tyler, who looked like he'd never done a day of physical work in his life, was struggling with his basket. He kept dropping vegetables and had to stop every few minutes to rest. But he was following his mother's instructions, carefully selecting the best produce from Alex's garden. "Are you sure this is okay, Mom?" Tyler asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I mean, this is somebody else's garden." "Don't be ridiculous," Linda replied without looking up from the tomato plant she was stripping clean. "This land should be part of our development anyway. The previous owners never should have been allowed to exclude it from the HOA. Besides, look at all this food. Just going to waste. Going to waste?" Maria almost laughed out loud. Alex checked his garden twice a day. He harvested vegetables at exactly the right time for maximum freshness and flavor. Nothing in his garden ever went to waste. But Linda was still talking, and what she said next made Maria's anger turn white hot. "We'll take all the good stuff to the farmer's market on Saturday," Linda continued, moving on to the bell pepper plants. "You can set up your own stand right next to that boy's booth. Show everyone what a real professional operation looks like." Tyler's booth? Professional operation? Tyler Morrison had never grown so much as a houseplant in his entire life, and now Linda was planning to steal Alex's vegetables and sell them as Tyler's own produce? Maria watched in shock as Linda filled basket after basket with Alex's hard work. The woman had clearly done this before. She knew exactly which vegetables were ready for harvest and which ones needed more time. She worked quickly and efficiently, like someone who had been studying Alex's garden for weeks. And she probably had been. All those times Linda had been taking pictures and making notes. All those hours she'd spent walking around their property line with her phone out. She hadn't just been looking for things to complain about. She'd been planning this theft. "Mom, there's someone coming," Tyler suddenly said, looking toward the house. Maria realized she'd been so focused on recording Linda's theft that she'd stepped out from behind the tool shed. Now she was standing in plain sight, phone in hand with a clear view of Linda and Tyler stealing Alex's vegetables. For a moment, nobody moved. Linda stood frozen with a handful of Alex's tomatoes in her hands. Tyler clutched his basket like he was afraid someone was going to take it away from him. And Maria just stared at them, trying to process the fact that her neighbor was literally stealing food from her son's garden. Then Linda's expression changed. Instead of looking embarrassed or guilty, she looked angry, like Maria was the one doing something wrong by catching her in the act of theft. "What do you think you're doing?" Linda demanded, as if Maria was the intruder instead of the property owner. "I think the better question is, what are you doing?" Maria replied, her voice shaking with rage. "That's my son's garden you're stealing." "From? Stealing?" Linda laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "This is community property. These vegetables were just going to rot on the vine anyway." "Community property?" Maria couldn't believe what she was hearing. "This is private land, my land. Those are my son's vegetables that he's been growing for months." But Linda wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed to be getting more aggressive. "Your son doesn't know the first thing about running a proper agricultural business," Linda said, gesturing dismissively at Alex's carefully tended garden. "Look at this place. It's a mess. Plants growing everywhere with no organization, no proper marketing strategy, no business plan." Maria looked at what Linda was calling a mess. Alex's garden was beautiful. The rows were straight and evenly spaced. The plants were healthy and well-maintained. The irrigation system was professional quality. Every tool had its place, and every section of the garden served a specific purpose. "Tyler is going to show everyone how a real farming operation should be run," Linda continued. "He's got vision. He's got business sense. He's going to revolutionize the local farmer's market." Maria almost laughed. Tyler could barely carry a basket of vegetables without dropping half of them. And Linda thought he was going to revolutionize farming. But this wasn't funny anymore. This was theft, plain and simple. And Maria wasn't going to let Linda Morrison steal her son's hard work and dreams. "Put those vegetables down and get off my property," Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Right now." Linda's response was something Maria never could have predicted. What happened next was so unbelievable that Maria still gets chills thinking about it years later. Instead of apologizing, instead of dropping the stolen vegetables and leaving, instead of showing even a tiny bit of shame for being caught stealing from a young man's garden, Linda Morrison did something that defied all logic and common sense. She completely lost her mind. "Don't you dare tell me what to do on my own property," Linda screamed, clutching the basket of stolen tomatoes like it was her precious treasure. Maria blinked hard, wondering if she'd heard correctly. "Your property? Linda, you're standing in my son's garden, on my land, stealing my vegetables." But Linda was beyond reason now. Her face had turned bright red and spit was flying from her mouth as she shouted, "This should have been part of Meadowbrook Hills from the beginning. Your little farming operation is ruining everything we've worked for." Tyler looked mortified. The poor kid was standing there holding his basket of stolen vegetables, clearly wishing he could disappear into the ground. "Mom, maybe we should just go," he said quietly. "Absolutely not," Linda shrieked. "We're not going anywhere until this woman understands that she can't just threaten innocent people." "Threaten?" Maria looked down at herself. She was holding a phone and a bag from the deli. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't made any aggressive moves, hadn't done anything except ask Linda to stop stealing from her garden. "Linda, I'm going to call the police now," Maria said as calmly as she could manage. "You're trespassing on my property and stealing my son's crops. This needs to stop." That's when Linda completely went off the deep end. She pulled out her own phone and started dialing frantically. But instead of calling someone to come pick her up, instead of calling a lawyer, instead of doing anything that made sense, Linda dialed 911. "Yes, hello. I need police immediately," Linda shouted into her phone, her voice so loud that Maria could hear the confused 911 operator asking for clarification. "I'm being held hostage by a crazy woman," Linda continued, her voice getting higher and more hysterical by the second. "She's threatening me and my son. We need help right now." Maria couldn't believe what she was hearing. Linda was calling 911 on her, while standing in Maria's garden, while holding baskets full of stolen vegetables. The 911 operator was clearly confused too. Maria could hear the woman's voice through Linda's phone, asking for an address and trying to understand what was happening. "We're at 1247 Oak Ridge Road," Linda said, giving Maria's address. "The woman who lives here has gone completely insane. She's threatening us and won't let us leave." "Won't let them leave?" Maria looked around in confusion. She was standing about 10 feet away from Linda and Tyler. There was nothing stopping them from walking to their car and driving away. In fact, that's exactly what Maria wanted them to do. "Ma'am, can you tell me exactly what threats were made?" the 911 operator asked, her voice professional but clearly puzzled. Linda looked directly at Maria while she answered. "She told us to get off her property. She's being very aggressive and hostile. My son and I feel threatened and unsafe." Maria felt like she was living in some kind of alternate reality. Asking someone to stop stealing from your garden was now considered a threat. Being upset about theft was aggressive and hostile. But Linda wasn't done with her performance yet. "We were just trying to help," Linda continued, her voice taking on a fake crying tone that sounded about as genuine as a $3 bill. "There were all these vegetables just rotting on the vine, and we thought we'd harvest them before they went bad. We were doing her a favor." "Rotting on the vine?" Maria looked at the vegetables in Linda's basket. They were perfect. Alex had been planning to harvest those exact tomatoes for Saturday's farmer's market. They were at the peak of ripeness, worth at least $50 at market prices. Tyler was looking more and more uncomfortable. He kept glancing between his mother and Maria, clearly realizing how crazy this whole situation had become. "Mom, seriously, let's just go," he whispered, but Linda was too far gone to listen to reason. "No," Linda snapped at her son. "I'm not letting this woman bully us." Then she turned back to her phone. "Officer, we need you to come out here immediately. This woman is unstable and dangerous." The 911 operator was trying to get more details, but Linda kept talking over her, making wilder and wilder claims about being threatened and trapped. Meanwhile, Maria was still recording everything on her phone. She had clear video of Linda standing in Alex's garden, holding baskets of stolen vegetables, calling 911 and claiming to be the victim. "Linda, Maria said, trying one more time to be reasonable. You're on my property. You're holding my son's vegetables. You can leave any time you want. Just put down the vegetables and go home. But Linda acted like Maria had just threatened to attack her with a machete. Did you hear that? Linda screamed into her phone. She's threatening us again. She says we can't leave unless we do what she wants. This is kidnapping. Kidnapping? Maria almost laughed out loud. Linda was standing in an open garden, 20 feet from her car, with no one blocking her path. If this was kidnapping, it was the most voluntary kidnapping in history. The 911 operator was clearly getting frustrated too. Maria could hear her asking Linda to calm down and explain the situation more clearly, but Linda was too busy working herself into a frenzy to give coherent answers. My son and I are being held against our will, Linda sobbed dramatically. We just came over to be neighborly and now this woman won't let us leave. Being neighborly? By stealing vegetables? Maria wondered if Linda actually believed the words coming out of her own mouth. Tyler finally couldn't take it anymore. Mom? Stop, he said, his voice firmer than before. This is crazy. Let's just give back the vegetables and go home. But Linda whirled around and glared at her son like he'd just committed treason. Don't you dare side with her against your own mother. We're the victims here. Victims of what? Of being caught stealing? Of being asked to leave someone else's property? Maria was starting to think that Linda might actually be having some kind of mental breakdown. While Linda continued her hysterical phone call, Maria noticed something that made the whole situation even more surreal. Linda was still picking vegetables. Even while she was on the phone with 911, even while she was claiming to be threatened and trapped, she was casually reaching over and grabbing more tomatoes to add to her basket. This woman was literally stealing vegetables while calling the police to report being victimized by the person she was stealing from. Maria made sure her phone was capturing all of this. The video was going to be important evidence when the police actually did arrive. Because despite Linda's crazy claims, Maria was pretty sure the officers would be able to figure out who the real victim was in this situation. The police are on their way, Linda announced triumphantly, as if she'd just won some kind of victory. And when they get here, they're going to arrest you for harassment and false imprisonment. False imprisonment? Maria looked around again. Linda was free to leave any time she wanted. The only thing keeping her on the property was her own determination to keep stealing vegetables while playing the victim. But Linda wasn't done with her dramatic performance. She was about to take things to an even more ridiculous level, and Maria was going to capture every second of it on video. The police arrived exactly 18 minutes after Linda's frantic 911 call. Maria had been counting every minute, partly because she was nervous about dealing with law enforcement, but mostly because she couldn't wait for someone with authority to witness the absolute insanity of what Linda Morrison was doing. 2 patrol cars pulled up the gravel driveway, their lights flashing but sirens off. Maria felt a mix of relief and anxiety as she watched 4 officers get out of their vehicles. She'd never had police on her property before, and she couldn't help but worry that somehow Linda's crazy story might sound believable to people who didn't know the full situation. But her worries disappeared the moment the officers saw what was happening. Officer Rodriguez, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, took one look at Linda standing in the middle of Alex's vegetable garden, holding baskets full of tomatoes, and immediately understood the situation. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez said, addressing Linda directly, I need you to step away from the plants and explain what's happening here. Linda's response was everything Maria had expected and somehow even worse. Thank goodness you're here. Linda cried, still clutching the stolen vegetables like they were her lifeline. This woman has been holding us hostage for almost an hour. She won't let us leave her property. Officer Rodriguez looked around the open garden area, then at Linda's car parked just 20 feet away, then back at Linda. Ma'am, what exactly is preventing you from leaving? She threatened us, Linda insisted. She said terrible things and made us feel unsafe. The second officer, a younger man named Officer Chen, was already walking around the garden examining the neat rows of plants and the professional irrigation system. He stopped next to one of the tomato plants that had been stripped completely bare. Who harvested these vegetables? Officer Chen asked. Before Linda could answer, Tyler finally found his voice. The poor kid had been standing there looking mortified for the past 20 minutes, and he'd clearly reached his breaking point. "We did," Tyler said quietly, staring at the ground. "My mom said it was okay because the vegetables were going to waste." Officer Rodriguez turned to Maria. "Ma'am, are you the property owner here?" "Yes," Maria replied, pulling out her phone. "This is my land, and that's my son's vegetable garden. I have the whole thing recorded if you'd like to see what really happened." Linda's face went pale when she heard about the recording. For the first time since the police arrived, she seemed to realize that her story might not hold up under scrutiny. "That recording is illegal," Linda protested. "She can't film people without permission." Officer Rodriguez shook her head. "Ma'am, this is private property. The property owner has every right to record what happens on her own land." While Officer Rodriguez was explaining basic property law to Linda, Officer Chen was examining the evidence. The baskets full of freshly picked vegetables, the stripped tomato plants, the fact that Linda and Tyler were standing in the middle of someone else's garden while claiming to be victims. "Ma'am," Officer Chen said to Linda, "can you explain why you're holding what appears to be stolen property?" "Stolen?" Linda's voice got shrill again. "These vegetables were abandoned. Nobody was taking care of them. We were doing a public service." Maria couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Officer, those tomatoes were going to be harvested this weekend for the farmer's market. My son has been growing them for months. They're worth about $50 at market price." Officer Rodriguez made a note in her notepad. "And you have documentation showing this is your property?" Maria nodded and headed toward the house to get her property deed and tax records. While she was gone, she could hear Linda's voice getting more and more desperate as she tried to convince the officers that she was somehow the real victim. When Maria returned with her paperwork, she found Officer Chen watching her phone video, while Linda stood nearby looking like she wanted to disappear into the ground. "This is very clear evidence," Officer Chen said, handing the phone back to Maria. "The video shows the suspects harvesting vegetables from your property without permission." "Suspects?" Linda's voice cracked. "We're not suspects. We're the ones who called you for help." Officer Rodriguez looked at Linda with the expression of someone who'd seen every kind of crazy during her years in law enforcement. "Ma'am, calling 911 doesn't automatically make you the victim. The evidence here clearly shows that you and your son were trespassing and stealing property." That's when Linda tried one last desperate move. She suddenly burst into dramatic tears and collapsed onto the ground, still holding the basket of stolen tomatoes. "I have anxiety," she wailed. "This whole situation is triggering my mental health issues. I need medical attention." Officer Rodriguez just sighed. In her 20 years of police work, she'd seen this performance before. People who got caught doing something wrong and suddenly developed mysterious medical emergencies to try to avoid consequences. "Ma'am, if you need medical attention, we can call an ambulance," Officer Rodriguez said calmly. "But first, I need you to return the stolen property to its rightful owner." Linda's medical emergency miraculously disappeared. "Fine," she snapped, standing up and throwing the basket down so hard that several tomatoes rolled across the ground. "Take your stupid vegetables. But this isn't over. I'm going to sue you for emotional distress." Officer Chen stepped forward. "Ma'am, I need to inform you that you're being cited for theft, trespassing, and misuse of emergency services. The false 911 call is a serious offense." The look on Linda's face when she realized she was the one getting in trouble instead of Maria was almost worth all the months of harassment. Almost. Tyler looked relieved when the officers told him he wouldn't be charged due to his age and the fact that he'd been following his mother's instructions. But Linda wasn't getting off so easily. As the officers were writing up the citations, Alex finally came home from school. Maria watched her son's face as he took in the scene. Police cars in their driveway, his neighbor holding baskets of his stolen vegetables, and his mother looking exhausted but vindicated. "Mom, what happened to my tomatoes?" Alex asked, looking at his stripped plants. "Mrs. Morrison decided to harvest them for you," Maria replied, unable to keep the sarcasm out of her voice. "She was planning to sell them at the farmer's market this weekend." Alex stared at Linda in disbelief. You were going to sell my vegetables as your own? Linda's response was to stomp over to her car, leaving Tyler to awkwardly return the baskets of stolen produce to Alex. I'm really sorry, Tyler said quietly. This whole thing got way out of hand. Your garden is actually really impressive. I wish I knew how to grow stuff like this. Alex, being the kind person he was, just shrugged. Maybe you could come by sometime, and I could show you how to start your own garden. You know, legally on your own property. The officers finished their paperwork and handed Linda her citations before she could drive away. 3 separate charges that would require court appearances and probably hefty fines. But the best part came later that evening, when Maria and Alex were sitting on their porch, finally eating that turkey sandwich from the deli. You know what's funny? Alex said, examining one of the tomatoes that Linda had damaged while stealing it. She took all this time to study my garden, took all these pictures, made all these plans to steal my vegetables and sell them, but she never bothered to learn the most important thing about farming. What's that? Maria asked. Alex smiled and took a bite of the slightly bruised tomato. You can't build something real on a foundation of lies. Good farming takes time, patience, and honest work, none of which Linda Morrison has ever understood. Within a week, word of Linda's vegetable theft had spread throughout both their small town and the Meadowbrook Hills development. Alex's farmers market stand became famous as the place where that kid whose vegetables got stolen by the crazy HOA lady sold his produce. His sales doubled almost overnight. Linda, on the other hand, quietly moved away 3 months later, unable to face the humiliation of having become the neighborhood laughingstock. Her house sold for significantly less than she'd paid for it, proving that sometimes karma really does work exactly the way it should. And Alex? He saved enough money that summer to pay for his first year of college, with plenty left over to expand his garden the following spring.